This is an historic event. As far as I know, no meeting like this has ever happened before on North American soil, which may help explain why the issues we will describe have received so little attention on this continent. It's our assignment over these 2 days to try to reverse that grim fact. The Moana Nui event in Honolulu 2011 was a tremendous success. It brought together dozens of activists from the Pacific, many of them here again today, and introduced them to activists from the continental US and other countries. The intention was to stimulate new collaborative effort. It was a great beginning for what we're continuing here now. I want to quickly mention 2 important aspects of that meeting and then leave the rest of the subjects to my colleagues, or they may want to amplify on what I'm saying. First, one of the prime goals of that meeting was to alert Pacific peoples, and the general public as well, as to the grim consequences of the secret new trade deals then being negotiated among Pacific countries led by the United States. In fact, the Moana Nui meeting was brilliantly timed to coincide with the meeting of 21 heads of state in a ritzy hotel in Waikiki, trying to give teeth and life to the new Trans-Pacific Partnership TPP agreement then underway. The TPP is the latest and most powerful global trade deal attempting to remove true governing authority over Pacific resources and Pacific peoples and governments, and to hand over that governing authority to global resource and development corporations. Activists are calling it NAFTA on steroids. The TPP will determine the remnants of democracy in the region and subordinate human rights, labor rights, indigenous rights, the rights of nature, and the rights of local governments in behalf of the rights of giant global corporations from someplace else. At the conclusion of the Honolulu meeting, many of the people with us here today joined the entire Moana Nui crowd in a march across Honolulu to demonstrate outside the TPP and APEC meetings in Waikiki. We shouted, we sang our complaints at Mr. Obama and his colleagues from the Pacific Rim. We showed this was not going to be ignored, and we will have a lot more detailed information about the TPP later and a couple of panels coming up today. Another aspect of Moana Nui 1 was equally disturbing to me and to all of us there, and that was the advance and acceleration of militarism in the region, which is ever becoming clearer and stronger. In November 2011, a new U.S. policy was announced by President Obama. He called it the Pacific Pivot, a deliberate acceleration of U.S. military power throughout the Pacific. Obama indicated that over the next 8 years, 60% of U.S. military resources would move from their present locations in Europe and the Middle East to the Pacific. It was a thinly veiled effort to threaten China and tell them to stay away from our resources, meaning all Pacific resources. That announcement came just after China had announced, shockingly, that it would no longer export its rare earth minerals to the United States. Rare earths are what make our dear friends at Google and Apple and Lockheed and the whole high-tech world quiver with passion. Without rare earth minerals, they would all be out of business. When Hillary Clinton heard about that in 2011, and this was just before our meeting in Honolulu, she responded as if we'd just had another attack on Pearl Harbor. She called it a shot across the bow and indicated that we must prepare ourselves for what might be an approaching war. The Pacific Pivot announcement came very soon after that. About 1 month later, after Moana Nui, I attended a lecture here in San Francisco by Admiral Bruce Willard, who was then head of the U.S. Pacific Command. I personally heard him announce that U.S. policy was now that the entire Pacific Ocean, extending 8,000 miles to the western edge of the Indian Ocean, was to be thought of as a kind of U.S. protectorate. He actually called it a U.S. Commons. That's a weird interpretation of the word commons, which usually means that all surrounding parties have equal rights to share the resources and decide their fate. This was a new kind of commons, controlled by only one party. This was a U.S. Commons. Of course, as the U.S. is not new to this concept, we all know the history of U.S. domination in the Pacific, going back to the Spanish-American War, the annexation of Hawaii, the bombing of Bikini and Eniwetok. Walden Bellow's book called it an American lake. We have 400-plus military bases in the Pacific already. 200 of them are on foreign soil, where they're being ferociously protested by the local peoples in Guam, on Okinawa, and in South Korea on Jeju Island. And we will have a celebrity guest from Jeju Island tonight, as well as in the Marianas and a new resistance in the gorgeous Cocos Islands for a giant U.S. Drone base to be set up on the Cocos Islands, very near to China. Meanwhile, our archenemy in the Pacific, China, has no bases on foreign soil. Its military budget is 1/28th the U.S. military budget, though it's starting to grow. Though none of this is meant to let China completely off the hook, they too have exhibited some very doubtful behavior concerning resources and sea lanes and other matters off the Philippines and Japan and elsewhere, and are reinforcing their navy. But what's becoming exquisitely clear is that U.S. military policy is really an expression of economic policy, primarily about protecting all resources from anyone else having any meaningful say about who uses them or how they're used, including the indigenous peoples who live there. The military policy plus the trade policy are wedded to each other like husband and wife. And they're also wedded to the resource raiding and environmental destruction of the region and the deprival of Pacific peoples' rights and cultures. And we'll hear more about that in the next panel. All of it is primarily in service to global corporate development and its death to small island economies. Since Moananui No. 1, this process has rapidly advanced, and so have the TPP negotiations. But happily, so have the resistance movements among the island peoples and the organizing efforts among indigenous peoples and small island governments. And we'll hear more about those as we proceed today and especially tomorrow. So, the Honolulu meeting was an unequivocal success. Maybe except for one thing. Not many people in the continental US or in North America, where a lot of this problem derives, have even noticed what's going on in the Pacific. Very little about Moananui appeared in the mainstream press, and most continental US residents still know way too little about the concerns of Pacific peoples. When we realized this, it was then we decided we should try to hold Moananui 2 here in California. Less beautiful, less fragrant, probably less fun, but we hope it will reach a new audience that needs to hear about this. Okay, so now let's hear from Ralph Regenbanu, who is really an expert on resources, and he'll tell us more. Thank you.